We live in an economy that doesn't price all these externalities, right? We shouldn't, we're not paying the service that the forests are delivering to us, for example, and that's why still makes economic sense to clear cut the Amazon rainforest to put cattle ranching to make a burger that costs $1, right? You're not paying in that burger. You're not paying for the true cost of the environmental cost of producing that burger, right? So if we are to survive as a civilization, we need to come up with a model that would price those externalities and those environmental services so that the systems can incentivize a sustainable way of managing the resources that we have. And hopefully carbon markets is the first step on that direction.
Hey guys, what's happening? Welcome to Your Forest. I'm Matthew Christoph. On this podcast, we talk about the environment and the science of sustainability. This podcast is available to listen on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, and Spotify. This is really just a place for people to come and talk about the things they're passionate about. Things said here don't necessarily reflect the sponsors' opinions. So today's episode, we're talking about carbon offsets and the carbon market and trying to clear up the confusion that is going on and has gone on around the carbon market and carbon offset stuff. So what I did was actually got contacted to talk to this guy. He is the CEO of a company called Pachama. His name is Diego Saez Gil. And yeah, it was a really, really great conversation we had talking about his company and what they're trying to do to further the confidence level of investors into the carbon market. So Pachama, his company, what it tries to do is to verify forest carbon offsets in the forest using remote sensing technology so that people who are buying offsets, they know exactly what they're buying, right? So these forest conservation areas that exist out there, they know, okay, this is the one I'm actually buying into, and they can go online, they can look, okay, it's grown this much, it's sequestered this much carbon, and I know that this is a real thing. It's not some kind of some kind of smoke and mirrors situation. So actually verifying the carbon that is being captured by those offsets. So really, really interesting. I think it's going to help get people more interested in this technology and getting people to try to offset their carbon emissions, right? So helping with this fight against climate change. And Diego is very passionate about this fight against climate change and trying to do what he can to make sure that, we can get there. And one of the things that I think has been missing has been this financial aspect of it, right? I think people are very emotional about it. Everyone knows that this needs to happen, but up until this point, the financial incentive to go that way has been not really there. So this is helping. So yeah, it was an awesome conversation. You guys are going to love it. Sponsors for the podcast. West Fraser is the number one sponsor for the podcast for 2020. And I could not thank them enough for their support. They have allowed me to, expand my reach a little bit and to get, the word out there a little more to get a little bit more notoriety. And, I can't thank them enough for the support that they've given me. It just made this so much easier to do. So thank you, West Fraser. And also Greenlink Forestry is also a sponsor of the podcast, been with me since the beginning, and I could not do this without them. Their support means a lot. And then Damaged Timber. Damaged Timber is a company supporting environmental sciences through the sale of their clothing. They have a scholarship they give out. 10% of everything they sell goes towards a scholarship for environmental sciences students, which is awesome. And yeah, go to damagedtimber.com, check out what they got going on. Really cool stuff. And put in your Forest 10 at checkout to get 10% off. So without any further messing around, let's dive right into it. Talking to Diego about carbon offsets, trying to clear up the weirdness and misunderstanding there. And the fight against climate change. Here we go. How did you get into wanting to deal with climate change and wanting to, you know what I mean? What got you
Yeah,
interest? What was the catalyst?
For sure, for sure. Happy to tell you the story. So, I guess stepping back to my origins, I am originally from Argentina.
Mm-hmm.
I grew up in an area of Argentina called Tucumán, that is the last tip of the rainforest that connects to the Amazon rainforest, right, in Argentina. And so I grew up surrounded by forests. My grandparents had houses in the forest, so that my childhood was filled with trips into the forest.
Right.
Then after that, I left Argentina to go and do a master's in Spain, in Barcelona. Then I came to the US to do an internship. And then here in New York, I decided to become an entrepreneur in the technology world. And I started building technology companies. And so my life path was leading me in that direction. And but then at some point, after having had some, level of success and failures with my startups, I decided that I wanted to step out and really revalue my life. This type of, moments in your life in which you want to make sure that you are in your right track.
Yeah.
And at the time, I was, really concerned about climate change and about, the way that we are treating our planet and what planet are we going to leave to future generations. And so in this, sabbatical time that I took, I went with my two brothers to visit the Amazon rainforest in Peru. And I saw firsthand how deforestation was continuing to expand at a very alarming rate in the border between civilization and the rainforest. And it was heartbreaking, really to see that. And at the time, I was researching that reforestation actually is one of the most effective solutions that we have to climate change. And not only we're not reforesting for as a solution to climate change, we actually continue to clear cut these primary forests that have been there for millions of years, right? Mm-hmm. So with that, I came back to the US. I settled in California in the redwood forest of Santa Cruz Mountains, and that's where I live now. And from here, started researching, reading a bunch of books, talking to experts, and really trying to understand how I could contribute with my experience building technology companies to financing and supporting projects that would improve forest management, start reforestation, or finance conservation as a solution to climate change. So that's how I got to this project. I'm happy to tell you more about what it is, but yeah, that's how I got, in a very unexpected turn back to the forest in my adult life,
That's awesome though. Like it's your situation is a really great example for how people whose skills maybe aren't directly applied to a climate change solution or environmental management solution, how you can take your skills and your interest and figure out a way to merge them to be helpful to society for the things that maybe you didn't expect to be doing, right? So absolutely.
And I think we need all hands on deck. We need educators, we need engineers, we need scientists, we need marketeers, all these skills that industrial consumer society has used so well for sometimes ways that are destroying the planet. We need all these skills to really protect and restore our planet if we are to survive as a civilization and leave a better planet to future generations.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I think the route that you've gone with your background with the technology and that kind of stuff is a route that, although people have tried to travel that direction, it's a route that has been sorely missing in, the solution to climate change is that financial part of it. I mean, I think it seems like a huge reason that our world has not moved past some of these problems is because of, financial incentive. And so if you can bring that, that subsidy in somehow, or try to incentivize people monetarily that'll be good for their pocketbook to deal with climate change, then that's only going to help hugely, right? Like that's I think the part that's been missing. So it's great to see companies like yours trying to add that component.
Yes. Yeah. And happy to tell you, how we are doing it.
Yep,
Um,
totally.
yeah. So basically, I researching, okay, what were the blockers? I asked myself, why, if planting trees and growing trees and protecting trees is such an effective solution to climate change, why we are not doing it? And I came to this conclusion that there weren't enough economic incentives, and the way that we are clear cutting the Amazon rainforest or Indonesia's forest is because people who own these lands want an income, right? And the only way they have to do it is just by replacing these forests with plantations of palm oil or soy or cattle ranching. And then in places in North America, for example, where we already are not clear cutting the forest, but we're still doing a very aggressive harvesting of timber. Sometimes, again, there is not alternative economic incentive. However, that led me to discover carbon markets, and carbon markets were this mechanism created by the United Nations that has the goal of making the polluters, the companies and the governments that are putting too much CO2 into the atmosphere, causing climate change, make those companies pay for a compensation that would go then to reduce emissions or to recapture carbon from the atmosphere. And
Right.
what I learned as I was researching about this market is that this market kind of had a first life in the early 2000s. Then there was a disillusionment on whether this market was going to work or not. But then after the Paris Agreement in 2015, this market started growing again, and it's effectively driving a lot of money into different projects. Uh, Still, when you look at what percentage of that funding from carbon markets goes to forest, is a very small percentage.
Mm.
So the reason why I learned was that measuring and monitoring forest was historically difficult, right? As opposed to measuring how much electricity a solar panel generates, which is you just put a sensor and you measure the output of the electricity. Well, measuring a forest is a lot more difficult, right? You need to send people to the field to take sample plots and then to count trees one by one, and that's how you determine how much carbon the forest is capturing, right? And you cannot do a new verification in real time, right? Um, so because of that difficulty of measurement and monitoring, there were questions around the validity of forest carbon credits. And frankly, it was really expensive to certify a forest for obtaining carbon credits. So
Right.
many forest owners who learned that they could potentially make money doing this were staying away from it because it was very expensive and not so easy to sell those carbon credits afterwards. So that was the problem that we thought that we could potentially help with if we could harness the latest technologies, making it easier to measure and monitoring the carbon capture of a forest remotely. And if we could make it easier to connect those forest owners with the companies that are looking to buy carbon credits, and using these technologies that I will describe now to bring more transparency and more trust between the parties.
Yeah.
So the technologies that we are using are basically satellite images, LiDAR data of the forest that can be collected by airplanes, and we analyze all those images with artificial intelligence. The
Mm.
same algorithms that Facebook uses to know that your face is you, we
Yeah.
used to determine how much carbon is there on a forest based on the size of the trees, based on the shapes of the trees, and we basically train algorithms using ground truth that is collected on the field, but then we can make predictions just using satellite images, and in doing so we can validate the claims of these projects, we can monitor them on an ongoing basis, and we can give a lot of trust to the carbon buyers that these projects are actually delivering on the promises at a very low cost.
Right.
So that's what we're doing.
Yeah, that's great. It's such a, like you were saying before, how it's original, the carbon market kind of originally, it kind of fizzled out. There was a lack of trust in
Yeah.
people. People didn't really understand what was going on. It kind of sounded ethereal. People
Right.
thought it was like buying stocks or something, and it just didn't make sense. Right. So
Exactly.
could you maybe quickly just explain, because even for myself, honestly, it's something that it sounds so strange that, you know what I mean? You can have, okay, we can positively affect the fight against climate change by just moving money around somehow, right?
Right.
But also, so can you explain the carbon market, just in very simple terms, like who is the seller, who is the buyer, and how does that actually positively impact the fight against climate change?
Yes, for sure. And that's been a problem historically, as you said, the lack of clarity, people not grasping it, completely the idea. But this is how it works. You have companies such as, let's say, airline X, right? That yes, what we need these airlines to do is to invest on biofuels. We need them to invest on maybe eventually having electric airplanes. We need them to move away from fossil fuels. Now, that is going to take some time, right? And meanwhile, we do need to fly. We do need to move from one place to another. Not that now in coronavirus times, but in normal times, we do need to travel, right? Now, so what this framework says is, okay, airlines, we're going to ask you to compensate the carbon that you are emitting into the atmosphere by purchasing credits that represent someone else somewhere in the world that is capturing CO2 from the atmosphere or reducing emissions in another way so that the CO2 that you put in the atmosphere gets compensated, right? And that does two things. The number one thing that it does is that it sends money to finance projects that we need to solve climate change, such as reforestation. But the second thing that it does is that it creates an economic pressure to the airline to really invest, more heavily on these innovations that are needed for them to move away from fossil fuels, because now they have sort of like an internal tax that if they move away from fossil fuels, they don't need to pay, right? So in theory, it's a really good idea. It's a system of incentives that incentivizes the polluters to move away from fossil fuels, and then incentivizes people in the other side to finance projects that can be really good for climate, such as reforestation, forest conservation, renewable energies, and so forth and so on. So now, one thing that there is a lot of emphasis today is that carbon credits should go to carbon removal and not necessarily to reductions of emissions. Reductions of emissions would be, for example, energy efficiency in a manufacturing plant or renewable energy. And these things are happening regardless. These things are happening because of economic incentives that exist intrinsically to these activities. Now, reforestation and forest conservation does need a specific incentive coming from carbon markets if they are going to happen. So, and then in the other side, you have a landowner in British Columbia or in Brazil or in Indonesia that, has a forest that can be restored, that could capture millions of tons of CO2 in the next 2 decades by the virtue of trees becoming bigger, and or they can clear cut and they can start doing other economic activity. And then so here comes carbon credits saying, like, look, you make a commitment not to cut down these trees for 40 years to improve the management of the forest so that the forest grows bigger and faster. And we're going to measure how much additional carbon your forest is capturing as a result of that. And we're going to give you certificates, and these certificates can then be sold to the airlines. And then the airlines can claim that they have compensated these CO2 emissions. So that's how the system works.
Right.
What was lacking in the first phase in the late 90s and early 2000s was enough clarity to avoid bad players, and to assure integrity of the claims, assure integrity of the project. But now we do have that. We have the internet, we have a lot of technology that can assure that the system works and it's not taken advantage by bad players.
Right. Yeah, for sure. So it's that's interesting to hear that you now have the certification process so that consumers can actually look into the company and be like, okay, I see that this company is you know what I mean, buying offsets, and therefore that's I should go with this company over this one because they are trying to help in this, you know, solution to climate change in one way or another. So that was going to be one of my questions actually, was, is there a certification process? And there is.
Yeah. So there are several certification bodies, international certification bodies that follow very strict standards established by the UN, and so all the projects that are on the market, the projects that we work with, have been certified by these certification bodies. We collaborate with them, and then the companies as well that are going out and claiming that they are carbon neutral also, you know, can get certified by different certification bodies. And what we do is, you know, we develop these technologies that analyze satellite images and validate those claims. And then we build a marketplace online that connects directly. You're a company, you come to our website, to pachama.com, you get in touch with us, and we present you with an array of projects around the world that you can support through carbon credits. We have projects in Canada, in the US, in Brazil, in Peru, in Uruguay, in Indonesia, in Congo. And these are all projects that either, conserving or restoring the forest.
Gotcha. So that was one thing that I think we should be very clear on, because like a lot of my listeners are foresters themselves and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And so these, like when you say clear cutting, you mean in the sense of deforestation for the creation of agricultural land or urban sprawl or something like that. And so when you say instead of cutting that down for a new agricultural land, you're going to leave it for another 40 years and that'll help sequester more carbon. That's what you're saying. So it's not, you're just helping to incentivize people to not have to deforest, essentially.
That is one type of forest carbon project. There is another type of forest carbon project that is called improved forest management. And improved forest management, these are forests in which harvesting for timber is allowed, but the project basically commits to a less aggressive or less frequent harvesting schedule. So instead of harvesting every 5 or 10 years, you commit to harvest every 40 years. So you let the trees grow a lot bigger. So you're still going to be able to harvest. You're still going to be able to do some timber production on the forest, but at a rate that allows for an additional carbon capture by the trees, right?
So these are privately owned forests, I'm assuming. These aren't, this is not public land. This is not, because like up here in Canada where I am, we would never, there's no way we can harvest every 5 years. Like that's not,
right.
You know what I mean? Our rotation at a minimum is every like 60 years, right?
Yeah.
So it's, so this is a private forest situation where it's almost you're talking about like a plantation type thing.
Both. I mean, it's mostly private forest owners that,
that makes sense.
And for public lands, there are some special conditions by which you could get credits, but it's different because in those cases, as you said, there is already easements that don't allow for the loss of carbon at the rate of a private forest.
Yeah, and that was one of the things I wanted to get to was how does the carbon market apply to public forests, but publicly managed forests, right? Because they're already practicing sustained yield management, right? And they're already there's lots of evidence out there trying to figure out whether or not a young forest or an old forest sequesters more carbon, and the answer is it depends.
Yes,
but I was wondering how can. Like one question I thought of was, how can, like say a forest company up here in Canada that practices only on public land, and they're practicing sustained yield management, or sustainable forest management, and how can they take advantage of a carbon market? Like, is there a way, perhaps there's, like, for example, perhaps there's a stand of trees that has some kind of biological value or an indigenous use value or some kind of recreational value that the company would rather not have to harvest it, but it's in their plan to do so. Is there a way to help them, incentivize them to not cut it down as a carbon incentive, as well as some of these other things?
Yeah. So the concept that is measured is the concept of additionality, and additionality means, is this project if we don't support this with carbon credits, are we going to lose carbon capture by this forest? If you can demonstrate that is the case, that effectively there is a real chance that carbon is going to be lost, then yes, you can get carbon credits. But there are a set of protocols and rules that explains how to validate, and that changes by country, and it changes by different types of forest and by different types of situations, right? So,
Sure.
but yeah, the answer is yes. If in a situation, even in public lands, to give you an example, in places like Brazil and Peru, where you have like these vast territories of rainforest, in which even if the public lands are protected, it's very difficult for the governments to enforce that protection. So illegal loggers go there and they just harvest and clear cut, and so in those cases, even in public lands where is almost like a protected park, they can receive credits because that funding will go so that the state can enforce the conservation and the protection by sending rangers to the borders and things like that, right? So,
Gotcha.
so it's all about what is the alternative universe in which we don't give carbon credits to this project, and what's going to happen there, right? So that's what you had to model in a way as part of this of the certification process.
Yeah. Oh, that makes sense, because I feel like there's a bit of a misconception around the deforestation globally, in that it's a lot of big companies, you know what I mean, cutting it down and doing certain things with it. But my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, I'm not educated in this as much as you are, that's for sure. My understanding is that it's a lot of what you're saying, illegal logging. It's a lot of people that are just trying to make ends meet down in South America and trying to feed their family. And that's what's actually causing the destruction. Yeah.
Sometimes it's also some form of illicit organizations that are, cutting down trees at scale in the Amazon rainforest and exporting that wood, that timber internationally. But these are all illegal operations. So it's
Gotcha.
It's like companies, but illegal companies, if you want.
Sure. Not above board. Yeah.
Exactly. So that is happening too.
Okay.
There are mining operations in the Amazon rainforest, unfortunately. Mining illegal operations in which they clear cut the Amazon looking for gold, and but as you said, corporations, sometimes it's the case that corporations are also doing clear cutting in places like that, but in many cases it's just illegal deforestation. When we hear that Brazil is losing a Belgium of coverage every year, it's a combination of all that. It's a combination of illegal deforestation and legal deforestation.
Okay, wait a second. Just say that again. So you're saying that Brazil is losing a Belgium size worth of forest to deforestation every year?
Yes, that's correct.
So what is that? Well, how big is Belgium?
I don't know. I read that tidbit on the World Resource Institute. But we're talking about, hundreds of thousands of hectares. And we are working with a few projects that have hundreds of thousands of hectares. They're the size of, there's one project that is the size of the Bay Area, San Francisco to Santa Cruz. So it's an enormous area. And the problem with the Amazon rainforest, by the way, is that there is this concept of the positive feedback loops and tipping points of deforestation, in which if you deforest above a certain point, then you could start a desertification of the rest of the Amazon rainforest, because the forest itself is regulating the flows of water, right, through clouds. So if you cut, I think if you cut more than 25% of the Amazon rainforest, then the rest will start to savannize. And that can have implications for the entire planet, right?
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's very interesting. So to be clear, I Googled it and Belgium is 30,000 square kilometers.
There you go. Yeah.
That's a lot of space.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. So yeah, so that's just in Brazil. As
Yeah.
far as the deforestation rate globally, can you speak to what that is? And also, can you contextualize that with the selling of offsets? So with the carbon market, what kind of dent is the carbon market putting into to try to neutralize the deforestation that is happening?
Yes, for sure. Yeah, I mean, what I can say is that today we have 4 billion hectares of standing forest in the planet, but that is about half of what we used to have before the Industrial Revolution. And and we have about 1 billion hectares that could be restored as forest without competing with agriculture. So these are areas in which we can do mosaic restoration or just plain mass reforestation in areas where agriculture is maybe not economically convenient as an alternative. And yeah, in terms of the impact that carbon markets can have is very meaningful. According to the World Bank, last year over $80 billion went into carbon markets. This is money coming from corporations and governments that are investing in those frameworks. So if and only 2% of the money went to forest. So if we could channel more of that flow of capital into paying for avoidance of deforestation and incentivizing reforestation, we think that that has the potential of capturing about 200 gigatons of CO2 from the atmosphere, which is a very meaningful impact on solving climate change, right? So the way we see it is, okay, the ingredients are there, right? So we have corporations and governments that want to put money on compensating their carbon footprint. We have landowners that would be willing to change their land use or to conserve forests and restore forests. And we have all the stakeholders that want to solve climate change, and then it's just about making sure that the money flows effectively to the right projects, and that we're measuring correctly how much credit each project should receive, and make it easier, make it not bureaucratic a process, make it very simple to participate.
Yeah, well, that's been the issue. I gather from this point forward is that a lot of people are hesitant to join in this because it seems like some kind of scam or something, right? Like there's been lots of criticism of the carbon market in the past, saying that, well, people that are involved in the carbon market are benefiting from climate change, and the impact they're making is ethereal. It's not real, right? So, what can you say to that? Just out of curiosity, because you're in that, and you know what I mean. What's going on?
And we're coming to this market as total outsiders, with the intention of understanding and helping steer the market towards more trust, right? And what I can say is that for the most cases, the majority of the projects that we saw out there are excellent projects, are projects that have effectively stopped deforestation, projects that have started reforestation projects that are incredible. We are seeing the results again through satellite images. We can look at historical data since the beginning of the project, and we can see the impact of the projects. The majority of them are very impactful, and the project developers are doing a great job. There are a few cases of projects that probably have received too much credits, or projects that haven't delivered on their commitments, but that is a small minority. Sure. And then when it comes to companies supporting carbon credits and carbon markets, yes, I would say that there are a few companies that what they want is they just want to get away from continuing with business as usual. A few energy companies that want to save face and greenwash, but the majority of the companies actually do care about having an impact, taking responsibility for their pollutions, and start to incorporate a carbon tax voluntarily inside of their operations. So yeah, what I would say is that there are a few bad apples, but the majority of what we see in the market is very well-intentioned people that want to solve climate change, that want to make this work. So then it's how can we communicate that? How can we show so that anybody can go and evaluate a project by their own means? That's what we're trying to do also on our website, is to increase the transparency so that anybody can go and see where the project is. Here are the satellite images. Here are the charts of how the biomass has grown on the project, and it can be audited by anybody.
Yeah, that's great, because obviously there's a certain amount of the population that they just are assholes, and I'm sure that goes true
right.
for
exactly.
organizations and companies too, right? So there's always going to be bad apples. I don't think anyone expects it to be perfect, but the intention was. So speaking to the actualization of to companies buying in, say companies are buying offsets because they want to be more green, they want to try to contribute. On your website, it stated that they can actually see the monitoring that you guys are doing, and they can actually see the progress that their dollars have allowed to exist, right? So can you explain that a little bit, and how much try to contextualize the amount of reforestation that's happening for the offsets that are being bought?
Sure.
For example, if a company like an airline company wanted to become quote unquote carbon neutral, what would that cost them, and how much land would be reforested to accomplish that?
Sure. I can share some points. Yeah. So in terms of the monitoring, what we do is we develop a model that we call disturbance alert monitoring model, in which every month we feed new satellite images into our platform for the areas that we oversee. And we use an algorithm to detect changes, right? So basically the algorithm compares the image from this month with the image from last month, right? So if there is deforestation, if there is a fire, even if there is a disease, the algorithm can detect, hey, here the canopy cover has changed, right? And we create these maps with red dots that mark the dots of where these disturbances on the forest are happening. So that allows us to basically inform the project developer and the carbon buyer, look, this is what's happening on the forest. And that keeps the project accountable. Right. And it just brings transparency to everything. And then we also do a measurement of how much biomass is there, right? So, and you can start seeing in the case of reforestation project, how the curve is going up and to the right? As the trees continue to grow and continue to capture carbon. That, generally can be seen over the years, not over the month, but it's a form of transparency for everybody involved in these projects.
Right.
In terms of how it would work specifically, let me give you one example that is close to your house, which is a company called Shopify, a Canadian company, that they came to us and they said, well, we want to offset our emissions, but we also want to offer our merchants with the possibility of having carbon neutral shipping. So they basically supported a project in the Amazon rainforest. It's a project that is about 50,000 hectares of Amazon rainforest that's being conserved. Their contribution is the equivalent of planting over 1 million trees. So in terms of pricing, what I can tell you is that the price of 1 ton of carbon by a forest project varies between $3 and $20 per ton. And that changes depending on the geography, depending on the risk of the project, and whether the project can sell these credits on compliance markets or not. There are a bunch of variables, but that is the cost of a carbon credit. And then generally companies decide to put together a portfolio of several projects that they support.
Right. That makes sense. Can you try to, I'm trying to just contextualize it in a way that individuals can understand, say there's a company out there that's listening to this and they're interested in investing in this, right? But they want to know what is what is this going to cost them? So say it's a company that has 100 employees, right?
Yeah.
And they, I don't know, you could probably figure out the metaphor somehow, but what is it going to cost them to become carbon neutral? I realize that's very subjective and you can go with it where you want, but I'm just trying to visualize it for people so that they can understand it a little more. I don't think people, in terms of, the tons of carbon that's going into the atmosphere, I don't think people really think in that way.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, that's why we're starting to talk about football fields, right? So your contribution is gonna conserve 2 football fields of forest in the Amazon rainforest, right? And it's not easy to standardize because each as you know, each type of forest has a different carbon concentration, and it's not the same a boreal forest and a tropical forest. But yeah, we are trying to come up with better ways. But yeah, to your point, yes, for a company with 100 employees, there is an estimation that if the company is not an industrial company, it's not a company that is sort of like a heavy emitter of CO2, let's say a service company, right? A consulting firm or a law firm, right? For a company like that, generally, each employee emits an average of 6 tons of CO2 per year. By the way, to visualize what is a ton of CO2 is the size of a small house. A small house, if you were to make a cube, that will be the graphic estimation of what is a ton of CO2. There are some graphs online if you search for 1 ton of CO2. But anyway, so that is the emission per employee based on commute, on the energy consumption, and on normal business travels of an average company. And so that means that if that company would want to compensate their emissions, would be about 600 tons of CO2, and 600 tons of CO2 at an average price of, let's say, $10 per ton, which would be an average on forest, then it's $6,000 per year, right? So for a law firm of 100 employees, for $6,000, you'd be compensating your CO2 emissions, and then this $6,000 would go on to protecting probably a few hectares of forest in the Amazon rainforest. And
that's incredibly doable.
Yeah.
Like that's incredibly doable, right? Like that's not $6,000 for for 100 people and a consulting firm, like just to become carbon neutral. And it almost sounds unreal. It almost sounds unreal. It almost sounds fake, right? Like it seems like it should cost you more. Like why aren't companies doing this? I mean, I suppose it has something to do with the consumer being willing to pay for that or not, I guess. I don't know.
I would say that the price should be higher. And there are economists, the last Nobel Prize on economics, he forecasted or he modeled that the price of carbon should be $50 per ton. So I do think that price is going to go up, but yeah, I think companies are starting to do it. Again, it wasn't easy to do it until recently. We hope to help change that. But yeah, more and more companies should and will, participate on compensating their carbon emissions. I wouldn't be surprised if in a few years being carbon neutral is sort of like the norm, right? This is what's expected of a company, that the company is carbon neutral.
I would hope so. Yeah, I would hope so, and that's where certification comes into play, right? For people to be able to know, like, you're buying carbon neutral, and it still seems weird and it's hard to quantify, but it's I wanted to get into the $50 a ton thing. Yeah, can we explain why? Like, how do you? Not you, but how do they come up with the price of ton of carbon? How does that equate to the real world? Like, what does that cost mean?
Yeah, so apparently the model consider, what would be a price that if it is required by regulations to all the companies in the world to pay for the CO2 they consume, what would be a price that would incentivize them to effectively move away from fossil fuels, right? And including oil companies, energy companies, airlines, and the calculation, the model said $50 per ton. If all governments of the world were to charge a tax of $50 per each ton of CO2 that the companies emit, then
Yeah.
Shell and BP and Chevron not immediately, but rapidly would be incentivized to move away from fossil fuels to other type of energies, and would solve climate change on dime. Basically,
Right.
that is
And
the model.
My understanding of it is that $50 a ton number is the way it's calculated is based on the cost of fossil fuels on our economy and on our health
Right.
and on our environment. So it's not a number my point is it's not a number that was just grabbed out of the air and
Right.
like, hey, this will
Right.
help solve climate change. This is a number that means, hey, this is what using fossil fuels is costing us.
Exactly.
And it hasn't been actualized in the economy yet. And therefore, this is something that if we want to have non-market failure, if we want to have a successful economy, we need to be including this in it. So it's not just that it'll solve climate change. It's that this is how economics works, or it's supposed to work theoretically, right? So it's not a random number. That's my point, I guess.
Yes, absolutely. And what you're pointing towards is the bigger problem that we live in an economy that doesn't price all these externalities, right? We shouldn't, we're not paying the service that the forests are delivering to us, for example. And that's why still makes economic sense to clear cut the Amazon rainforest to put cattle ranching to make a burger that costs $1, right?
Yeah.
You're not paying in that burger, you're not paying for the true cost of the environmental cost of producing that burger, right? So if we are to survive as a civilization, we need to come up with a model that would price those externalities and those environmental services so that the systems can incentivize a sustainable way of managing the resources that we have. And hopefully carbon markets is a first step on that direction.
Yeah, absolutely. So, getting back into the reforestation, or I should just say the forest projects that you're involved with, or your company Pachama is involved with. Where are most of those projects? Are they mostly in South America, or are you working, like, for example, I mean, the boreal forest across Canada and Russia is the biggest forest in the world.
Yeah.
And I know the numbers are weird here, but I think the boreal forest globally is responsible for the majority of carbon sequestered by a forest. I'm not entirely sure, but that's just, I've read that. Are you working in the boreal at all as well, and maybe coastal? And are there other forests besides the Amazon and South American forests that are part of your focus?
Yes, for sure. We do have a few projects in Canada and in Alaska that are boreal forests, and you're right. These are enormous forests with enormous carbon capture capacity, and there is also an enormous possibility of restoring more forest in the boreal forest. We have a few projects in Canada. We have a few projects in Alaska. We have several projects in the U.S., in the East Coast and in the West Coast of the U.S. Then we have projects in the Amazon rainforest in Brazil and Peru. We have some reforestation projects in Uruguay and Chile. These are plantations of eucalyptus and pine that are not actually native species of these regions, but they still are doing a great job at capturing a lot of carbon. These are plantations that maybe were originated for pulp production or for timber production back in the day, but now they have transformed to just focus on planting trees for carbon capture. We have
that's interesting too, because it's like I spent some time in Peru just a few years back, and I noticed being a forester, I noticed the eucalyptus, right? And I was like, why is this here? But it wasn't just plantations; like, it was along the highways. It was used as erosion protection. It was everywhere. Like, it was everywhere, and I was like, this is incredible. Like, what happened here, right? I had so many ecological questions, but also I didn't get a lot of answers from the people that I was around. But that's an interesting, because eucalyptus grows so fast, right? So,
eucalyptus come originally from Australia, I believe, right? So it's so interesting to know how in hell they arrived to so many corners of South America and everywhere, right? Yeah, it's a tree that grows fast. It's a tree that produces, good timber, produces, good products, right? So I guess at the beginning just spread naturally or spread, by humans, but with no a particular plant. But now again, these are effective ways of capturing a lot of carbon. But, of course, we also want to prioritize native species and biodiversity, and that also has to be considered on carbon projects. But yeah, we do have some eucalyptus plantations in Uruguay. And then we have, some projects in Africa and Indonesia as well that are either conserving primary forest. We have a project in Borneo that is conserving primary forest in peatlands as well. And then in Africa, we're working with a project that is doing community reforestation. A lot of small farmers that are doing reforestation in their properties. So yeah, frankly, there's opportunity everywhere in the world. We are trying to expand as fast as we can to cover the entire planet. And just to be clear, we're not the owners or the operators of these projects. We are partners of these projects. These are different organizations. They are doing the work on the field. And our role is to measure and monitor the work with satellites and connect them to carbon buyers.
Right. Absolutely. So you're willing to accept forest projects that are certified anywhere in the world, as long as you can make sure that what you're doing is investing in something that's actually happening. Exactly. That's great. I imagine Russia is a hard market to get into.
Yeah, well, we actually got the two first projects in China. These are projects that came to us, some reforestation projects in China. Super interesting because China is a different world. But yeah, I mean, we definitely want to be everywhere in the world.
Mm-hmm. Oh, absolutely. Yeah, because that's what I mean. It's not just the Amazon thing. Like, I think Amazon gets a lot of the attention because it's such a it's such a fantastic place to think about, right? Like, it's very I don't know. It's fantasy for a lot of people, I think, in the world to think about the Amazon. It's considered the epitome of natural and wild, right? So but there's a lot of other forests that can be included in this to help solve this problem for sure.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, the Amazon has, in addition to the symbolic value, I do believe that it has a big value on the interconnected ecology of the planet. I think that if we lose the Amazon rainforest, we don't know what are the climatic implications for the rest of the planet. There are people that says that it could desertify Asia and Africa because of the flows of clouds. But yeah, I agree with you that everywhere in the planet there are opportunities for restoration and forest conservation.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. So you spoke a little earlier about forest fires and that kind of thing. And in this world where, the world we're in now, where forest fires have become a lot bigger and you know what I mean? They're consuming a lot more of the forest than we're used to in the last, 100 years. How does that play into the carbon market? Because obviously, I mean, once a forest burns, that's releasing a whole bunch of carbon. However, the forests are well adapted to rejuvenating and recovering after a fire. And there is evidence to show that perhaps the new growth might be actually sequestering more carbon than the old growth, depending on the forest. So how does things like fire, and knowing that fire is going to be more prominent, bigger fires in the future, how does that play into this market?
Yeah, no, totally good point. Because unfortunately, with climate change, we're gonna have more fires. That is a fact, and we're already seeing it in California. We saw it in Australia last year. We saw it in the Amazon rainforest as well last year. So it's a reality. We have to deal with it. Now, when it comes to carbon projects, what it means is that these are reversals, right? Reversals of the carbon capture that has been certified. And there are mechanisms in the certifications that allow for, so each project that gets certified contributes to a buffer pool is called, that basically keeps credits, that then can replace the credits that were reversed on the case of a fire, right? So, so that is a form of insurance if you want. So each project is getting credited less than they would normally. And that, difference is going to this, sort of like buffer bank, that will replace the credits of a carbon buyer that has had a big reversal. That is one of the ways that is done today by the system. in the future, we hope that with better data coming from satellite imagery, we could better predict the risk of fire, and we could also help project developers act more proactively to prevent fires, right? So to do some form of forest management to reduce the chances of forest fires. But then, as you said, it's true also that in certain type of forest, fire actually is positive for the forest, and it can actually in the long term produce more carbon capture. So yeah, I mean, it's something that what we need is, again, better data, more transparency, and better systems that would account for that to occur. The fact that there are wildfires shouldn't be a reason not to support forest carbon, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
for sure. I guess my point was, no, and that makes total sense. I guess my point was along the lines of, if a forest project, a conservation project, because these conservation areas that are being conserved, they're inevitably going to, like in most forests, or a lot of forests in the world, are fire dependent, right? They have fires that happen regularly. That's part of the natural ecology and natural succession of the forest. So it's inevitable that these conservation areas will at some point burn. And I was just curious as to how the carbon market is, you know what I mean, dealing with that issue. So how much is the buffer, the insurance, in case that conservation area burns down? Can you tell me that?
Yeah. These buffers are generally 20%.
Okay.
So yeah, 20% across different landscapes should compensate for the risk of fire.
Right. That makes sense. That seems reasonable to me. I mean, that's just an anecdotal perspective for me, but it seems like that's a reasonable assumption to make, for sure. I think you're keeping yourself safe.
Yeah, and it is a concern that, many times, carbon buyers, these companies supporting carbon credits would ask, okay, what happens with a fire? Should we go with something safer, right? Solar panels don't burn, right? And what we say is, sure, it is a risk, but the fact that this risk exists, shouldn't be, shouldn't prevent companies from investing in forest carbon offsets. And again, these buffer mechanisms are reasonable. They will get better over time with better data, in which each specific project will have a different risk profile. But these are part of the ecology of the forest, as you said.
Right. Well, that makes sense. So I wanted to talk about this whole machine learning thing. This is more specific to my interest. I'm not sure how interested my listeners are to it, but like I do forest inventory myself as my day job kind of thing. So I'm interested in the whole idea of mapping the forest from a carbon perspective, especially from what you're trying to do. It's a more global approach. How does the machine learning work? Like what's going on there?
Yeah, totally. So we built a couple of machine learning models. The one for carbon inventory, for carbon stocks, basically feeds into a data pipeline. In one hand, field plots coming from different sources, right? So forest services from around the world sometimes release data publicly of field plots in which you have carbon inventory of a particular plot. Project developers, companies, and universities, all of them are sources of field plots. And in the other hand, you have LiDAR data that is collected by airplanes or by drones. And LiDAR data, basically produces this 3-dimensional cloud of points, right? That allows you to know the height of the canopy and the shape of a forest. And then in the other side, you have satellite images. You have multispectral satellite images coming from different providers. So we input all this data, and basically the machine learning algorithm learns to correlate that a certain shape, that a certain combination of colors in a certain height contains a certain amount of carbon, right?
Okay.
With enough data points, it can start making predictions. And then you make predictions in areas where you don't have all the data, and then you test that prediction with some ground truth, and you validate the precision of these algorithms.
Gotcha.
And then you can start making predictions in other parts where you have no data and the predictions are good enough, right? So,
gotcha.
Yeah.
So you're trying to it's basically the machine learning situation is basically you're allowing the computer to do the the interpretation of the data versus having to pay an individual to go through thousands of terabytes of information to sort it out. So okay. So to that end, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say it's the same thing that Facebook uses, as I said at the beginning, to know your face, or the same technique that is being used to win the game Go, right? In which you have the computer learning by trial and error, and with enough data points, start becoming really, really good, better than any superhuman could at making predictions, right?
Right. Oh yeah. And do it at a speed that, nobody could possibly compete with. So So what is your accuracy like when it comes to, you know what I mean? A prediction that you've made, and when you go to the field, and how accurate? I imagine it's not 100%, but like, what is it? How accurate have you become?
Yeah, of course, it depends on the availability of data that we have in each type of ecosystem. But we have proven in the US that we could have between 2 and 10% error with 95% confidence.
Really?
Which is really good. Is within the requirements by all these protocols of accuracy across the landscape. This is the work of our chief scientist in the team who did a PhD in forest remote sensing in the University of Maine. And he basically, the work of his PhD was proving that accuracy could be achieved in New England, in the US.
That's awesome.
Then, so we're starting to expand that level of accuracy to the rest of the world, but not everywhere in the world we have the same level of data availability, right? So
of course. So you got to work with whatever you're given. But if you have good data, you can get 90 to 98%. That seems almost unfathomable to me. I was thinking, I was looking forward to you being like, we're like 65, 70% accurate. I'm like, that in my mind at a global scale, that would be a pretty good step in the right direction. But to know that you're that far along in that predictive model, and that's predictive of the carbon capture there, that's pretty incredible.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's a field that has advanced a lot thanks to, again, more data available today. And then, deep learning, which is this particular technique of machine learning that's been, developed by Google and Facebook. And the fact that we have, so much computer power today, we have GPUs that can run, so much, data calculations at a very, high speed. So all these technologies are coming together to allow for things that were unfathomable a few years ago.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. No kidding. Yeah. This is all, it's crazy to see how fast things are moving. I love it. It's awesome. Yeah. I wanted to ask you about individuals. Like say as an individual, I wanted to offset my carbon output. Is that something that exists? Is that a market that exists for people to invest in?
Good question. Is definitely something that we are starting to see. We did put in our website the ability for anybody to go select a bundle of projects, let's say in the Amazon or in the Acadian forest or in the boreal forest, and then purchase with your credit card. It's not something that we have pushed with marketing too much yet, but we are going to allow that on our website. And I think that is going to happen. People are starting to, care about compensating their own emissions. It's not so easy to know. One thing that we haven't added on the website yet is the ability to calculate what is your footprint, right?
Yeah, totally.
That flight to London, how much CO2 emitted, right? So, but if we make it easier for people to know their footprint and for them to support the forest project, we think that people will. And I think it'll be exciting.
Absolutely. Well, I think it's one of those things where, especially in the northern climates where I live in northern Alberta, it's extremely challenging to become carbon neutral. It can be done, but it's very costly, and it's really for the affluent, right? Like if you're not a very well paid person, it's really next to impossible for you to pull it off. Like it gets to minus 50 in the middle of winter here. Our homes generally aren't close to our working places. And no one's riding their bike in minus 50,
right?
At least not a sane person. I know some crazy people that do it, but it's not for everybody. But so for places like northern Canada, where it's a little bit more challenging than, say, California or you know what I mean, Central America, to try and become more carbon neutral. It might be one of the better options for people that have that desire but don't have the opportunity to do so here, right? So I mean, I would think that the best way to be carbon neutral would be to try to reduce the amount of carbon output you have, period. That's probably the best way to go about it. And there's ways to do that are cheap. But barring that, this is a pretty great secondary option, I think, while we're trying to sort this out, right?
Yes, exactly. And if you are someone in northern Canada, you might want to support the forest in northern Canada, right? So that is also something that we want to make it super easy, right? So you can support your local forest by very easily going and compensating your carbon footprint. I think if 7 billion human beings would do that, we would be way closer to solving climate change. Absolutely. Right. And it's just a matter of making it available, and hopefully with time, people will start to really empathize with, the climate change problem and try to take it seriously. And it's something that I'm interested in very much so. Right. So it's to see solutions like this carbon market thing, which is something that's, I've heard about for, like you said, a decade now, and never really took it too seriously because it just seemed confusing. But now that it's starting to gain some traction and accreditation, so proof that what's being paid is actually doing something positive in the world. That's huge, right? I think that might increase investor, happiness and make people more likely to actually pay for this kind of stuff. So it's great. Yeah, totally. No, this is awesome, Diego. I really appreciate you taking the time to come on here and explain your company and everything like that. And is there any kind of final thoughts, any words of wisdom that you want to throw out there for people that people might want to know? Let's see. Well, one thing I like to say is that besides being incredible machines to soak up carbon from the air, forests are a source of so much more for humanity and for the rest of the planet, right? So forests are the sources of food and medicine for many indigenous communities, and for us, all the medicines generally come from the forest. And forests are the sources of water conservation, right? We are starting to scratch the surface of how the earth works, right, at a global scale, and how the earth systems combine their dynamics to maintain the climate on check for the planet. And then from a spiritual perspective, I believe that a walk in the forest can be one of the most powerful human experiences, right? So with all that, I think it's a moral responsibility as humans to protect and restore the forest. And I think that's something to keep in mind when we work on these fields. And hopefully climate change and carbon markets is making us react, but I do hope to see a civilization that reconnects with nature and knows the importance of protecting and restoring, that humans should assume the role of stewards of the forest, stewards of the planet. So hopefully, we all jump into that mission.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. That was said very eloquently. Thanks a lot for saying that, Diego. I appreciate, those kind of sentiments, because it's personally, I think we're going that direction. Like I'm seeing that investment, I think, into the natural world and into sustainability as an idea globally, right? So I totally agree. And I believe in us. I think the humans can pull this off. I think we got the means and the morality to do so. So I'm looking forward to see, the next couple decades here, where we go and how we can, innovate and solve this huge problem that we have. And this is an excellent way to start, I think.
Absolutely, Matthew. Thank you so much for the work that you are doing, also promoting these ideas.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you. Thanks a lot for listening, guys. I hope you enjoyed that. Great conversation. Yeah, I couldn't thank Diego enough for coming on to talk to me. It's been a subject, carbon offsets and the carbon market. It's been a subject I've wanted to get into for a while, and this was a great chance to do so. If anyone has any questions, concerns, you want to shoot me an email, yourforestpodcast@gmail.com, and I will definitely get back to you. Thanks a lot, guys. See you next time.